stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mayedhi Rudrayate Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today on verse number 16. Let's chant together. Shabdaksharam Param Brahma Tasmin Kshine Yadaksharam Tatvidvan Aksharam Dhyayet Yadichet Shantimatmanaha. If inner peace is desired, the wise person should meditate on the imperishable Supreme Being who remains after the idea of the imperishable is destroyed. Several important things here. If inner peace is desired, of course, we all seek peace. It will be very difficult to find someone who will consciously say, I don't want peace. But oftentimes, when we say, I want peace, we are thinking about the disturbed state of the world, the environment, the surroundings in which we are, and say, we want peace there. What is not often recognized, that the cause of external disturbance is really the inner disturbance. That if there is no peace inside, then the way we think, the way we deal with other people, the way we do our work will naturally be a cause of conflict. So in order for external peace to become possible, in order for the peace in the world to become possible, there has to be peace in the heart. That's first thing. And we know, especially those of us who take spiritual life seriously, that in order to experience that inner peace, we need to somehow find a way to connect with that deeper reality, deeper truth within our own heart. Call that deeper truth by any name. Some people call it spirit. In Sanskrit it's called the self or the Atman. Or you could even speak about the divine, the supreme being. It doesn't matter what words we call. In fact, that's what this verse is about. That there is this divine within us, and if we can get in touch with the divine, discover what our relationship is with that truth in our heart, we will find that inner peace. But look at the last phrase, that we meditate on the imperishable Supreme Being who remains after the idea of the imperishable is destroyed. Now, this is a very important point in spiritual life. What we are dealing with when we are now studying this text or whatever text we study, we're dealing with ideas. Even when we speak about God, we're speaking about the idea of God. When we are discussing the Atman or the spirit, it's the idea. Because what can be communicated, what can be exchanged are ideas. Experience itself can never be shared. Experience is always subjective. Experience is always personal. It's like this, that two friends can sit and say, let's drink coffee. Now, what you can share is a cup of coffee. You fix a cup, prepare coffee and say, okay, here is a cup for you and here is a cup for me. You can share that coffee. You cannot share the coffee experience, because when you drink coffee, you have that coffee experience. When your friend drinks coffee, she or he has that experience. But you can describe your experience. After drinking coffee, you can say, oh, this was a great coffee, or this is delicious, or it's atrocious, anything. But what we are really doing is we are putting our experience into words. And what we are really communicating is not the experience itself. Well, we are communicating the experience, but through words. So what the other person hears are the words. The other person doesn't get your experience. That other person gets that other person's experience, but not your experience. So all this is to show that we need to get this clear in our head, that just because if whatever the Upanishad says makes sense and it becomes clear in our head, what is being clear in our head is the idea, not the reality itself. So if the idea of the Atman or the spirit makes complete sense to you and it kind of resonates with your head and heart, that does not mean that you have experienced the Atman. What it simply means is that you have acquired a clarity of mind regarding the idea of the Atman. The difference between the idea of God and God is the same difference between the idea of an apple and the apple. Now, we can discuss the qualities of apple and virtues of it and constituents and what benefits apple can give. And that will give us a lot of knowledge about apple. But the experience about apple, you cannot eat those ideas. You cannot eat those words. You cannot eat the book, the thesis written on the greatness of apple. You can chew it to pieces. You will not get any taste of apple. That will not be an experience of apple. For that, you need a real apple. But that doesn't mean that the study of the apple is useless. It is helpful, but that's different from eating an apple. That's why Ramakrishna often used to say that we have come to the mango orchard to eat mangoes. What if people who go to the mango orchard and say, okay, let's eat mangoes, and they suddenly discover there are lots of mango trees, and then say, why don't we just first count the number of trees here? And then after counting, say, someone gets a better idea. I need to know how many branches there are, and let's count the mangoes. And how many of these mangoes are ripe and how many are not ripe. And all that knowledge may be useful in some ways. But you can spend days and weeks and months doing it. You will still have not tasted the mango. And who is a wiser person who goes to a mango orchard, goes and picks up an apple and starts eating it? That person will have the experience of mango, while others would be only talking about mangoes. We have to be careful when we study these texts, the scripture classes that we have in the study group meetings. We are talking about the Atman, we are talking about God, we are talking about spiritual life. Talking about spiritual life is not the same as actually living and experiencing spiritual life, but it's helpful. So that's the distinction that to be kept in mind. I've sometimes mentioned to you that even when we are asked to meditate on God in heart, and we try to take the help of a visual, a symbol, or an image to focus our attention. Let's say you are meditating on a divine figure of a Buddha or a Ramakrishna or Shiva or Jesus. When you visualize that divine figure in the heart, we must be careful that we are visualizing a living, true presence of that divine figure. Sometimes some particular image or a picture or a photograph or a sculpture could be an inspiration that might help me visualize that figure better. But when I'm meditating in the heart, don't meditate on a photograph. Don't meditate on a sculpture. Because if you meditate on a photograph, you will realize the photograph. But you don't want to, photograph realization is not the goal of life, right? And so that's the difference between the idea of the imperishable and the imperishable. And so that is why it is said that meditate on the imperishable being who remains after the idea. So the idea of the imperishable being has to be destroyed. Let me give you another one instance about this. When Ramakrishna studied under a Vedanta teacher named Totapuri, and that teacher who wanted to teach him about the non-dual, ultimate transcendent reality, so he asked his student, Ramakrishna was his student then, that to withdraw your mind from everything in the world, all forms, all names, everything. And that was easy for Ramakrishna to do. It was such a pure, clear mind with this intense desire to experience the divine. He was able to withdraw. He had no attachments, no desires. He was able to withdraw his mind from everything without difficulty. What he could not do, that he was so much attached to the divine in the form of Mother Kali, the divine as the goddess. That was his all in all. And so he describes later that he was able to withdraw his mind from everything, but not from that blissful form of the Divine Mother. And try as he might, he couldn't do it. And then his teacher said, no, you've got to destroy that form. If you want to go to the formless, you've got to destroy that form. And it's not easy. It's not easy to destroy something to which you've gotten attached, something that is so close to you, something that is so meaningful to you. And then Ramakrishna said, he said with tremendous determination and using his willpower, he said he visualized discernment as the form of a sword. And then he said mentally he used that sword of discernment to chop the form of the Divine Mother into two pieces. And then he said his mind soared into this infinite reality. So the idea of God has to be transcended in order to reach God. The idea of God can help us, but at some point it has to be transcended. So, when we say we are meditating, what most of us are doing in the initial stage is we are thinking about God in whichever form or in whichever way we have been taught by our teachers. We are dealing with ideas, we are dealing with forms, we are dealing with sounds. Meditation in the truest sense of the term is not thinking. Meditation is, well, thinking is thinking, but meditation is meditation. When we say we are meditating, we are not really meditating. What we are really doing is we are thinking. Now, thinking is only the next best thing we can do. Ideally, when we say God is in our heart, all that we need to do is shut our eyes, shut our mind from the world, look inside the heart, and God is there, you will find God there. That's the simplest process. But what happens when we begin? We shut our eyes, we try to not to think about anything in the world, and yet either our mind is still thinking about the world, or even if we have withdrawn the mind, what we see is darkness. So we are not able to see God. And because we are not able to see God, the next best thing we can do is think about God. So thinking is good, thinking is helpful, but that itself is not meditating. Now what happens is this. When our thinking becomes concentrated, thinking becomes focused, becomes so focused to the exclusion of any other thought. So only the thought of God remains, often in the form of your chosen deity, the form of your Ishta. Only one sound remains in your heart, the sound of your prayer or the sound of your mantra. So just one sound and one form. Nothing else remains. Now when the mind is able to get focused to that extent, something happens. No one knows the mechanism of how exactly that happens. But at that point, your thinking will stop on its own. You don't have to consciously stop it. It'll stop on its own and seeing will begin. Until that point, you'll have to make an effort to visualize the divine in your heart. But when that point is reached, thinking stops and seeing begins on its own. It's a little bit like when we say, oh, I need to go to sleep now. Sleep is something you cannot consciously bring about. What we can do is we can try to create favorable conditions for sleep. And a favorable condition is, usually, switch off the lights in your room, find a comfortable place to lie down. As far as possible, don't think of anything, because otherwise those thoughts will not allow you to sleep. That's the best you can do. And just be there. At some point, so these are the things you can do. Create an environment for sleep to happen. And then sleep happens at some point. You never know. None of us knows the exact moment when we slip from the waking state to the sleep state. But it happens at some point. Meditation is a little bit like that. What we can do is create an environment ideal for meditation. And that environment is try to shut out the external sensory data as much as you can. So no thought other than the thought of God, no sound other than the sound of your mantra, no form other than the form of your Ishta. And just be there waiting, just like someone who goes to catch fish. All that you can do, well, what can you do to catch fish? Well, just be there, that's all. You take your fishing rod and put a nice bait and then just be there. Fish will come. You have to be alert. Know when the fish comes. That's all that we can do. So meditation is like that. So we are dealing with ideas, but at some point, in the thinking with the idea stops. That's what is meant by saying, who remains after the idea of the imperishable is destroyed. So when that idea goes away, the presence, the real presence of God remains in the heart. So this is important to remember. The distinction between God and the idea of God. Next verse. Dve vidye veditavye. Let's do it again. Dve vidye veditavye tu Shabda Brahma Param Chayat Shabda Brahmani Nishnataha Param Brahmadhi Gacchati. Two kinds of knowledge should be sought, the word Brahman and the supreme Brahman. One who has mastered the word Brahman attains the supreme Brahman. A similar verse comes in another Upanishad called the Mundaka Upanishad, which also says that there are two kinds of knowledge. In that Upanishad, the two knowledge are described as Aparavidya and Paravidya, lower knowledge and higher knowledge. Lower knowledge is described as all knowledge that comes from books, including the books that we see as revealed texts. So including the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas. Now those are books. There are words in those books, and those words convey ideas. All knowledge, even in books which are seen as revelations, belong to lower knowledge. That is what is described here as the word Brahman. That is, that supreme divine described through words. If all of this thing is lower knowledge, then what is higher knowledge? And the Mundaka Upanishad describes it by saying, that knowledge which gives me the direct experience, the direct knowledge of the Supreme, that is higher knowledge. And that is described here as saying, the Supreme Brahman. One who has mastered the word Brahman attained the Supreme Brahman. So, in simplest language, all theoretical knowledge is lower knowledge. All knowledge of theory, all understanding of theory, even the knowledge that we get by studying scriptures, it's still theory. Now that theory will become real, so to speak, only when we experience it, and experience occurs through practice. So when we practice, so now we have learned something from this Upanishad that we are studying, and now we have theoretical understanding. Now that is still lower knowledge, that is still word Brahman. Now if now mastering the word Brahman means not just understanding the superficial meaning of the text, but also seeing what is between lines, that what does it really imply, what is this text really trying to convey, and how does it then become a part of my life. So some knowledge, if it just remains here, then it just remains at a cerebral level. Then with that kind of knowledge, you may be able to impress your friends, you can have very learned discussions on it, you might be able to write books on it, and you can be a scholar. But that knowledge has to somehow descend into the heart. That knowledge has to we have to live that knowledge. Then, that is what is meant by saying, mastering the word Brahman, that Supreme Brahman is reached. So that's the distinction made here. Two kinds of knowledge. It's possible that whatever we are studying now, if we retain this only and keep it only at the intellectual level, we'll have some intellectual clarity. But that still doesn't guarantee that we will realize God. That still doesn't guarantee that we will be enlightened. We'll be enlightened only if we do some. It's a little bit like you buy a recipe book and you have all the recipes and you know exactly how a certain dish is to be prepared, in what proportion the things are to put. That still doesn't mean you can enjoy that dish. In order to enjoy the dish, you actually have to go get the things, put them together in the right way, cook them, have patience, and then when you eat it, then that's when you really enjoy it. So right now, this is a spiritual recipe. Verse 18. Grantam abhyasya medhavi jnana vijnana tatparaha palalam ivadhanyarthi tyajed grantham asheshataha. After studying the scripture, the wise person who is intent on both knowledge and experience should discard the scripture altogether, just as one who wants rice discards the husk. Now, the husk over the grains of rice plays an important role. It's necessary. But a time comes when that has to be removed. Otherwise, you won't enjoy that rice. So similarly, the studying of scriptures, the studying of text, theoretical understanding is helpful, but at some point you'll have to leave that theory behind and actually begin to experience it. How long can you need to hold on to your books? Ramakrishna used to say that sometimes if you have to go shopping and you have a bunch of things to get, then we sometimes think, what if I forget? And so if there are 10 things to be brought, then it's helpful sometimes to make a list and then keep that list with you. But then when you actually go and buy those things, you have already bought those things, you got this shopping cart, the things are there. Now what are you going to do with that list? You don't need that list anymore, because beyond that point, that list becomes only a burden. You need to just throw it away because it's useless at that stage. Exactly in the same way, all this study that we are doing, this will be just so much burden to carry in our heads unless we do something constructive with this knowledge that is acquired. And once the knowledge is acquired, these texts and intellectual thing is not needed anymore. It's a little bit like we can use a boat to say, here's this lake that needs to be crossed. You use a boat to cross the lake. Now, you've reached on the other side of the lake. What are you going to do with the boat? And you don't want to come back again, because your whole intention was to go on the other side and never ever to come back. And then how wise would it be to say, but I don't want to leave the boat, let me take the boat and carry it with me. But then that's a big burden. You don't need the boat after the purpose is reached. That's why after God is realized, all the scriptures and everything becomes useless. In fact, the beauty of the Vedas is that the Vedas themselves say that they need to be left behind. The Vedas themselves say that, this is the text, it says, Tatra Vedaha Aveda Bhavanti. What it means is, a stage is reached when the Vedas become non-Vedas. So now we hold this, a revealed text, it's so much revered, worshipped almost. And it's because, it gives me knowledge. But after the knowledge is acquired, I still want to carry it and cling to books, that can be a great burden. In fact, book worship, it can be problematic. If of all that I can do is just keep on buying books and adorning my shelves with it and never read them, then that's a problem. Because I might sometimes it does happen. We buy books and you kind of have a satisfaction. Well, I have that book, but if I've not read that book, what is it? Perhaps when your friends come over and they'll be impressed by the size of your shelves and the books there, but you may not have read any of them. So we'll have to see how the book learning can be a burden. It's in that sense that it is said that one who wants both knowledge that comes from books and experience that comes from practice, such a person should discard scripture when their purpose is achieved. Verse 19. Gavam aneka varnanam kshirasyapyeka varnata kshiravat pashyate jnanam linginastu gavam yatha. Even the cows of different colors give milk of the same color. The wise person views knowledge as milk and the scriptures as cows. Now this is important. One of the reasons for religious conflict, interreligious conflict, or even intra-religious conflict within the different sects and denominations within a tradition has been about book worship, because most of these world religions have their own books, and to the followers of those traditions, their books are sacred, and so they follow those texts. But what is said in my book may be a little different from what is said in some other book. And then the problem is, if it is different, then the thinking goes that both cannot be right. And of course, no one wants to say that they are wrong. So you say, well, my book is right, your book is different, so your book has to be wrong. And so a lot of these arguments, quarrels, sometimes even wars have occurred just fighting over the supremacy of my book over your book, my God over your God. So what this verse points out is, just as cows have different colors, although nowadays, because of all this interfering with the genetic code, sometimes cows tend to look kind of similar, but if you go and if you have moved with cows, it's a line, especially in at least in a few decades ago, you really could see different shades of cows. And so what he's saying is that all the cows may be of different shades and different colors. The milk they give is of the same color. So similarly, although the words in different scriptures may be different, even the ideas which the words convey might seem different, the truth that those books convey is the same. So how is it possible that if the truth is the same, why would the words be different? Why would the ideas be different? And that's easily understandable. As I said, again, let's go to that coffee table. All can get some nice coffee, and then we can ask everyone to describe their experience. Describe, well, how did you find the coffee? And if those people speak different languages, first of all, they are going to describe their experience in different words. And again, if some among them who are asked to kind of say, speak for the next 5 minutes on how you found the coffee. And again, we are going to use the symbols, the images, the examples, the metaphors, depending on the that which we are familiar with. So if I have been brought up in a certain cultural setting, and the images and symbols that I am familiar with, I'm going to describe my experience using that language, those symbols, those cultural artifacts. And different people from different eras of history, different backgrounds, are going to describe, although they have probably drunk the same coffee, they are going to describe it very differently. So the revealed texts of different traditions can be seen as the experience, the inner experience being described by these enlightened ones. And because these enlightened ones came at different points in history, in different parts of the world, they used different language, different symbols, and so on. So just because the scriptures seem to be saying things differently, using different language and words, etc., that doesn't necessarily mean that they are pointing to a different being or a different reality. So that's the idea that's conveyed in this verse. That's why even the word Vedas, now for instance, the Hindu religious texts are called the Vedas. But if you go to the literal meaning of the word Veda, Veda means to know. It simply means knowledge. And Veda doesn't necessarily mean Hindu knowledge. There is no such thing as a Hindu knowledge. When knowledge is knowledge. That's why even Vedanta means the essence of the Vedas. Now, if you take Vedas as referring to specific books, then Vedanta would still have a very narrow meaning, because it's essence of certain books, which are different from other books. But if you go to the literal meaning of the term Veda, meaning knowledge, then Vedanta means the essence of knowledge. And knowledge can occur in any part of the world at any point in history. So, knowledge of truth, that is Vedas. So, if you take this literal and universal meaning of Vedas, then you can see that wherever truth occurs in whichever form, even though it might look different outwardly, it is the same truth. And that's true with regard to everything, not just the abstract truth, but even the divine that we worship. Again, we might use different ways to describe the divine. We might pray differently. We might have different rituals. But the one to whom all these prayers go is one and the same being. That's the idea. Verse 20. Gritamiva payasi nigudham bhute bhute vasati vijnanam satatam manthayitavyam manasa manthana bhutena. Like the butter hidden in milk, consciousness resides in every being. It ought to be constantly churned by the churning rod of the mind. Very few people nowadays prepare butter from milk at home. We usually, if you want butter, just go a shop and buy butter. So many may not even know where this butter comes from. If you ask the younger generation, they don't even know where milk comes from, because milk comes from a shop, from a mall. You go to, there is a milk, what do you call that? Milk carton? Yeah. Well, that's where milk comes from. But of course, I hope all of us know that butter does come from milk. And the traditional way, butter was brought out was the churning of that milk. So you had milk, and there was this one big, this is a little bit like that. There's a kind of churning rod. There used to be a rope here, and then you kind of do it like that for a long time, and then the butter would come. So that's the imagery provided here. Now, when you look at milk, you don't see butter in the milk. Visually, well, the milk is milk. But if we have a little bit of imagination, you can see that if by churning of the milk, if butter is going to come out, that butter wouldn't come out if it were not already present in it. The potentiality of butter was present in the milk. If it was not there, it could not have come out of the milk. So with a little bit of imagination, you can see, oh, here there is a possibility of butter present here. So that's exactly in the same way consciousness is present in us. Now, one important thing to remember is this. We say we are conscious beings, but we are not conscious of our consciousness. We are conscious of the objects illumined by our consciousness. It's a little bit like light. None of us can see light. Light cannot be seen by at least the human eyes. We are incapable of seeing eyes. What we can see are objects illumined by light. So if there were no light here, we wouldn't be able to see anything. And we are able to see everything because of light, but light itself we cannot see. Exactly in the same way, everything in the world we are conscious of is because of the presence of consciousness. So because there is consciousness present in me, I am conscious of this object. If there was no consciousness, I wouldn't be conscious of anything around me. Now I'm conscious of the objects illumined by my consciousness. Am I conscious of my consciousness? Am I? So the goal is to become aware that we are aware. So we have awareness, but we not always aware of our awareness. And that's the way we then know that consciousness is not something simply that we have, but consciousness is something who we are. There's a difference between having consciousness and being consciousness. Science tends to see consciousness as a product of the it's a product of the neurological activity. It's a product of the brain that at some stage in evolution consciousness got introduced and things became conscious. That's a very materialistic view, which doesn't have any scope in it for anything what we might think of as transcendent. The Vedantic view is different. The Vedantic view is that consciousness is eternal. It wasn't produced at some stage during evolution. At some stage during evolution, you may have become aware of it, but it existed. Just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean it didn't. And so, because of that independent nature of consciousness, it never had a beginning. And because it never had a beginning, it will never had an end. And I am that consciousness. I'm not simply a being who is conscious. I'm not simply this body and mind which is conscious. I'm the consciousness which makes the body and mind conscious. And that's why when a person dies, that consciousness and the mind have left that body. And that's why the body is lying there, unconscious. So the consciousness in the body does not belong to the body. It's kind of borrowed consciousness. And the one from whom that consciousness is borrowed, when that being leaves the body then dies. And so keep this distinction in mind, being consciousness and being conscious. So we have consciousness, but what has consciousness technically is the body and mind. And I am that consciousness itself. So that's the important thing to keep in mind. Verse 21. Jnananetram samadaya uddharet vannivat param Nishkalam Nishchalam Shantam Tad Brahma Hamiti Smritam. The Supreme should be brought out like fire with the rope of knowledge. I am Brahman, the indivisible, immovable, and calm. This is how it is thought of. So, go back to that example of the churning. So we need the rope in order for the butter to be brought out. So every time a student of Vedanta affirms, it's a conscious affirmation that I am Brahman, the indivisible, immovable, and calm. You don't necessarily have to use these words. Again, these are words, these are ideas. Put it in your own words. It doesn't have to be in your own language. So there is nothing very magical about it. All that it means is, right now, we effortlessly think of ourselves as human beings. As human beings who are born at some stage and will die at some stage. Although we don't want to think about it, but it'll happen. That's who we are. And we are affirming it. We don't go about affirming, I'm a human being, I'm a human being. We don't have to say that, but we go about our day-to-day activities. We forge relationships. We do our work. We think. Behind all of this is this basic self-understanding that I'm a human being. Now that understanding has to be changed. And to tell myself something that is so different from our present experience. It's so different that some people will think you are crazy if you say it aloud. So don't say it aloud. But tell yourself, I'm infinite. What limits me is the body. Well, I'm not the body. It's like this. You live at home, but the walls of your home don't limit you. You can walk out of them anytime. In fact, most of us are out most of the time. So just being inside a home doesn't mean you are limited to that home. So this body is our home. It's a kind of a home. We have been free home provided right from the time we are born until we are expelled at some point. Now, but we are not limited to this body, limited to this home. Similarly, the mind. If all that I do is dwell within the limitation of my mind, I'm still within the walls of my mind. But I'm not limited by it. So I'm more than my body. I'm more than my mind. I'm more than my intellect. Now, to affirm this, if I'm more than the body, mind, and intellect, nothing limits me. So I am infinite. What is born is the body. What dies is the body. And if I'm not the body, I am birthless and deathless. Again, don't say it out aloud. But every time you remind yourself of this, you're kind of pulling this rope and churning that milk. And the more often you remind yourself of it, the quicker and the better the churning will be. And that butter of knowledge will come. But japa is nothing but a churning of the mind. Again, not every japa you are essentially saying I'm birthless and deathless. But whatever mantra you have, mantra is a form of prayer. And that prayer, directly or indirectly, will ultimately give you this same experience, that you are that infinite being. You are that being who is never bound. So every time you do your japa, you are really churning that rod of the mind. And that knowledge will come. So that's the image that is provided here. It ought to be constantly churned by the churning rod. So the mind itself is considered like a churning rod. And this repetition of these higher truths about ourselves, about our connection with God, are the rope which churns the rod of the mind, through which this higher knowledge comes. Verse 22. Sarva bhutadivasam yat bhuteshu cha vasatyapi sarvanugrahakatvena tadasmyaham vasudevaha tadasmyaham vasudeva iti. I am the all-pervading Supreme Being. I am the all-pervading Supreme Being, in whom all beings reside, and who, as the giver of grace to all, also resides in every being. So that is the knowledge, that is the experience. Again, this is not cerebral knowledge. This is the experience that will come when I churn the rod of my mind with this higher knowledge. This is the experience that we will get. The repetition, I am the all-pervading Supreme Being, I am the all-pervading Supreme Being. In many of these ancient texts, the repetition is a signal that here the text ends. So this particular text is coming to an end. They usually signify it by repeating a key phrase there. So this is how we come to the very short Upanishad, the end of it, and we see that it deals very clearly, very succinctly with some basic truths about essential in our spiritual practice. We saw in the beginning, the Upanishad spoke about the nature of the mind and its role in our spiritual understanding, our spiritual practice. That is, the mind is the instrument we have, and we need to understand what role this instrument plays in our practice. Then the Upanishad also spoke about that supreme state. What is the nature of that goal to be attained? And finally, we saw the method of attaining it. Sure, it's not, there are no details given here. It's a very short Upanishad, but it points out the way, that what are the things we need to do in order to experience that truth, and how that experience will free us. So the instrument, the goal, and the method all have been described here in a very simple but straightforward way. So you have any thoughts, ideas, questions on especially the portion that we saw today, but in general, anything else that we have studied in this Upanishad as well from the beginning?
Swamiji, you mentioned that when meditation matures, the mind stops or thinking stops. So does that mean that when you are doing your japa and you're visualizing, but then as it matures, you will stop doing your japa?
It will stop on its own. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Swamiji, I think at the start of today's lecture, you talked about the experience. So experience is always like we have to experience ourselves. But in many cases, I feel that the experience which other person is having, we can experience without even saying. But if somebody is unhappy or even I think when Ramakrishna when touched Vivekananda, I think he experienced the knowledge or everything. Mm-hmm. So is it possible to share the experience?
No. When Ramakrishna touched Narendra or Vivekananda who became, what Vivekananda experienced was what he experienced. How is it that he's experiencing Ramakrishna's experience? See, yeah, it's still not, your question is not clear. It's like this. Suppose now I prepare coffee and I drink that coffee, but in the same coffee, I prepare extra and I pour it into 2 cups and I give you 1 cup and I take 1 cup and I drink coffee and you drink coffee. Now we have drunk the same coffee, but your drinking of your coffee is your experience. My drinking of my coffee is my experience. That experience may be similar, But it's not same, right? I mean, there is a difference between same and similar. We have not drunk the same coffee. We have drunk similar coffee. Because how can two people drink the same coffee? If I've drunk it, then you can't drink the same thing because I've already drunk it. Does that make sense?
Okay.
No, you're not. You don't seem convinced. So I think it's probably, I'm probably not expressing it probably very clearly. Now, when Ramakrishna goes into Samadhi, he is experiencing whatever he is experiencing in Samadhi. Now, other people in the room who are seeing him going into Samadhi, their experience is of a person going into Samadhi. Right? So they are not really experiencing, Ramakrishna is not sharing his experience with them. Their experience is of someone, here is a person going into Samadhi. But Ramakrishna's experience is whatever he experiences. So experience, any kind of experience is always subjective. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, think about it. Yeah, I don't think, I'm trying to see which is the best way to express it, but that's the best I can do right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, actually.
Why does consciousness make it so hard for it to know itself?
Actually, it doesn't. It's kind of become hard because we have never really done it, or we have forgotten how to do it. Because if I am consciousness, to know that I am consciousness should have been the most obvious and the easiest thing to do. But how come that which is the easiest has seemingly become impossible? And that is why they say the definition of Maya is what makes the possible impossible and what makes the impossible possible, or at least seemingly possible. So that's why that which is the most obvious thing has apparently become the most difficult thing. That's the only explanation we can give. Yeah, your question is very good. That you don't need another, just like light. In order to see an object in darkness, I need to bring light and see it. Now, I don't need to bring another light to see this light. This light illumines itself as well as the objects around it. So our consciousness illumines the objects we are conscious of and also illumines itself. Consciousness doesn't need another consciousness to be brought up. And yet, because our senses are kind of programmed, unfortunately, to be only going out, we have lost that faculty right now to kind of turn the light of consciousness back upon ourselves, which is why we are not conscious of our consciousness. It's a little bit like I might have a flashlight with me and I'm in darkness. And even if I'm standing before a mirror, I still can't see myself, because in order for me to see myself, that light will have to be turned towards me. If the light is turned only outwardly, then I'll be able to see everything with the help of that light, but I cannot be seen. So right now, that is what has happened. Consciousness is kind of pouring out from outside me. I'm giving a very visual, but so as if consciousness is going out through all my senses and mind. With the help of that, I'm conscious of everything around me. But I myself am in darkness now. Now, in order for me to be conscious of myself, that power of consciousness has to be withdrawn and kind of turned back upon me. And that's what really we're trying to do in meditation. In waking and dream state, our mind is continually going out. And in meditation, what we are trying to do is trying to take a U-turn, make this power of consciousness go back to ourselves. And because most of the time, most of our lives, we have always looked outward, that making it turn is becoming a little it's not impossible, but it's difficult. And all that we need is practice. Yeah.
And Swamiji, what is the role of grace and devotion in that reversing of the searchlight?
Yes. Things happen, and if we cannot explain of how they happen, then we say, well, grace, it is grace. I think for the time being, I'll just stop it here because it's a big subject, it's a good question. What I am hoping to do, that when we meet after the recess, we will study a text called Narada Bhakti Sutras that really has a good discussion about grace. So I'll reserve it for them. Okay. Yeah. Ashish? Yeah.
Swamiji, in this text, there is the churning rod of the mind, this example that has been used. But typically, we think of stilling the mind as a way to see the light. So I'm wondering why this text chose to use this churning of the mind.
Again,
which
different images might help different people. So stilling of the mind also is one way of understanding what's happening. Churning is also one other way of understanding. Because you see, even when our effort to still the mind, we are still taking the help of ideas in order to still the mind. Because the goal is to still the mind, but it doesn't happen right away because the mind is still going about. So what we are really doing is, instead of the mind being churned by random ideas, think about it this way. If this rod, so mind is kind of a rod, and there are 50 strings tied in different places, and they are being pulled in different directions, with nothing is being synchronized, then the strings, this is not going to really go around in a part, nothing is going to come out. So even then you can say that even when the effort to still the mind, what we are really doing is to say, well, let it be pulled by only one rope and one this thing. So that imagery might work even then. Here, Mahindra.
Swamiji, what is the role of intellect?
Internet?
No, not internet. Intellect.
Intellect. Oh,
intellect.
Okay.
Between the mind and consciousness.
Again, intellect is not, although we kind of speak about it as a distinct entity, there is no such thing as that this is the mind and this is the intellect. So we have kind of an invisible faculty within us. And we sometimes call it the ego, the intellect, the memory, the heart, and we got all these different names, but they are not like different organs within us. So there is this invisible personality, which is not visible to me. And depending on the kind of functions that are performed, I give it a different name. So in Sanskrit, sometimes they say, Sankalpa Vikalpatmakam Manaha. So when this inner instrument is just weighing the different pros and cons, we call it the mind. It's like, oh, I've got these lots of ideas, I have to decide, I've got many choices, I don't know what to do. This kind of feeling, then we call it the mind. Then Nishchayatmika Buddhihi. When I'm then able to determine, they said, okay, this is the choice I make, or this is the decision I take. So the determinative faculty. So when the inner instrument gets into this determinative mode, then you call it the intellect. Again, so different functions given different names. Okay.
So there are over 100 Upanishads in general, and I remember when I discovered Katha Upanishads years ago, it became one of my favorite scriptures, but as I started reading others, I got confused because I couldn't follow, the line. And do you have any advice on the succession of the Upanishads that is recommended, or it's
No.
just you just pick and read and.
Any one Upanishad can give you enlightenment. We don't really need to read too many Upanishads. In fact, any one verse of an Upanishad can give you enlightenment. So it's not how many Upanishads you read. In fact, it's possible that the more you read, the more confusion might occur.
Probably that would happen.
Yeah, so this is not to discourage more study, but yes, in fact, there is the third foundational text of Vedanta. It's called the Brahma Sutra. What the Brahma Sutra does really is it picks up these different statements from different Upanishads which create this conflict. Well, this Upanishad says like this and this Upanishad says like that. And it doesn't seem to harmonize. Brahma Sutra takes some of these examples and show the harmony. So Brahma Sutra is a book that people study when they have studied many Upanishads, and then it kind of harmonizes the different things. In general, I think reading the Upanishads, especially the portions which seem difficult to understand, with the help of some good commentary, sometimes helps in removing these possible points of conflict.
Homework for August, Brahma Sutras.
Oh, that's a big text. That's a big text. For instance, just to give you one example, the Upanishads in several different forms, in different ways, have said that the ultimate reality is beyond the reach of the mind. That the mind and the senses cannot take us to that ultimate reality. In different ways it is described. That seems like, well, that's what the Upanishad says. Now, one of the Upanishads also says that that ultimate reality can be known only through the mind. Now, what are you going to do? It just seems clearly a contradiction. One Upanishad says this, the other Upanishad says that. And that's why when you go to the commentary, Shankaracharya then points out that when the Upanishad says that that ultimate reality can be known only through the mind, it means the mind that has become purified. Su samskritena manasa, the mind that has been completely cleared or removed of all its limitations and all its dross and all impurities, that mind will reveal it. So that's how commentaries become helpful. We could think about it this way. I mean, what choice do we have? I mean, the only thing we have is really the body and the mind. And so the mind is a good instrument. It just needs to be, when it's like this, when we don't use an instrument for a long time, don't use it well, it gets rusted. It just needs a little bit of tinkering to make it, and it will reveal us. Yeah.
Swamiji, my question goes off of what was asked earlier by him. If the idea is that our true potential is that we're infinite souls and we don't realize it and we haven't reached that realization yet, why is there such a superimposition of, like, why is it so hard to realize if that's our truest form? And who made it and why?
Well, you made it. Every one of us has done it. I mean, it's like this. Oh, why did the dream start? Well, because I fell asleep. Why is it so difficult to get out of the dream? Well, not that difficult. You just have to wake up. But that waking up doesn't seem to be in our hand right now, because we don't know the dream to be a dream. In the dream, everything appears to be real. So that's the answer. It's hard until you know it is easy. I mean, think about it this way. We say we are having a really terrible nightmare, let's say, in a dream, a terrible night, then it's very real to you. And at that time one might say, oh, my God, this is so terrible. How can I get out of it? It's impossible. How hard it is to this world. It's really simple. You just have to shake a little, wake, and then the whole thing is gone. So that's why it is hard until you know it's easy. Yeah. Here.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm new to this whole Vedanta thing, but so I was not actually raised religious in any sort of way. So this is sort of a new experience for me. But I've always enjoyed meditation for a pretty long time, and I feel like I've gotten a good grasp of it. You know, focus on the breathing, make sure clear of thoughts, all that. But when you talked about viewing the God within, I guess I don't really have a strong sense of grasping a sense of divinity. So when I meditate, this has been the only experience I've had. It's just I only view darkness, and it's kind of just my eyes closed and just ignore every thought that pops up in my head randomly. But is there any sort of advice or thing that I should be able to, that I can focus on while I'm meditating that would help me, I guess, get a stronger sense of, actually getting like value out of the meditation?
Absolutely. It'll be definitely helpful to have a clear idea about what to do when we are trying to meditate, and something that can bring about a real inner transformation in which we can really feel that something is changing for the better, that I'm becoming a better person as a result. Yes. Sure, it can be done. Why don't you come sometime and we can sit and talk about it? Okay? Yeah,
thank you.
Very good. Yeah.
So, Swamiji, we all know how to acquire more knowledge. We can go pick up books and come to classes. But how do we experience divinity more each day? What can we do each day to experience more?
The simple truth is this, and it's a very good question. That is, and this is general, not just about the books that we have just studied. In general, if anything in life makes sense, if it resonates with your head and heart, ask yourself the question, how can I live that way? Because most of us understand the value of being truthful. Most of us understand the value of being honest. Most of us understand the value of being unselfish. Now, simply understanding that value is not enough, because I can understand the value of being honest and yet go about my daily life being totally dishonest. I can understand the value of being unselfish and yet in my daily life be totally selfish. So, if anything in life, again, not just from spiritual texts, anything, if it resonates with your head and heart, if you feel, yes, that's right, then somehow it shouldn't remain only as an intellectual idea. Somehow then say, if it's right, I should live accordingly. And that's true for people who see themselves as believers. If someone says, well, I believe there is God, then the question is, well, if you believe God exists, how does that belief translate itself in the way I think, in the way I do my work, in the way I deal with other people? It's very important. It's not enough to say, oh, the divine exists in all, or there is the truth in the heart of every person. If that makes sense, then am I really making an effort? I may not succeed fully, that's different. But am I at least making an effort that every person I meet before me has that truth within that person? Because then we speak about loving everyone. We speak about having respect. We speak about respecting other people. Now, it's not just an idea. I must have a reason. Why should I respect the other person? Not simply, there is a utilitarian standard. Well, in social life, if everyone respects everyone will be happy, that's great. But if I know, why should I respect? When I respect myself, why do I respect myself? Why should I respect the person in front of me? So these are the kind of questions if we ask, and if we find good answers to them, and then we try to live according to that, then life will become authentic. Otherwise, sometimes our intellectual life, the ideas that we have are great, and they kind of live in one plane, and our daily life goes in a different track, and never the twain shall meet. That doesn't work. And so an authentic life would be, we may not have a lot of ideas, but whatever few ideas we have, if those ideas we are convinced, intellectually at least, of the rightness, the truth in those ideas, then somehow that must become a part of my thinking, a part of my speaking, a part of my working. Then that would be the way to live spirituality, not just talk about it or read about it. So thank you, everyone. So we now will conclude this Upanishad with a prayer. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So, as I said earlier, so as we come to the conclusion of this Upanishad, this was also the last meeting before recess of the study group. So, next meeting will be on 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. 13th? Yes, 13th, yes. So, next meeting will be on 13th September. 13 is not an inauspicious number in Vedanta. We will, I thought of beginning a study of the text called Narada Bhakti Sutras. So we have been now studying the Upanishads and all of this for a long time. And I thought it might be good. It's not a very big text. It's a book about grace, about love, about what does it mean, the path of devotion, the path of surrendering to a higher reality, a higher being. How different, how similar it is from all this abstract philosophy that we have been talking about and thinking of. I think that's important to know, because emotions and feelings are an important and integral part of our mind. That's a power. Just like there is a willpower, just like there is a power, the reasoning power, and there is the power of emotions and feelings. And that's all of us. Some of us may be more emotional than others, but everyone has feelings and emotions in the heart. And what that text does, it helps us take a look at that power in our own heart and see how we can employ that power to get over our limitations and to become truly free beings, to experience the kind of joy, peace, and fulfillment that we all desire. How can our power of feelings and emotions help us discover that inner peace? So it's a very, very helpful book. So that will be our text called Narada Bhakti Sutras. I'm thinking of, you can get any copy of the book from any edition, so long as it has, make sure the title is Narada Bhakti Sutras. The one I found helpful is very simple and uncomplicated commentary. Is by a senior monk of the order. His name was Swami Bhuteshanandaji. He was a former president of the Ramakrishna order. So that's one book I would recommend, but feel free to get any edition. If you already have a copy, then even that's fine. So that is the book we will study when we meet after the recess. On Sunday, this will be the last satsang. Next Sunday, we'll have Antar Yoga as always. We'll have readings from different texts and a reflection, music, and a birthday celebration of everyone born in the month of July and August. So all of you are welcome on Sunday. And on Saturday, we'll have again the last meditation before recess. And after that, we will, that program after the recess will resume on 10th of September with the Krishna festival. So these are the upcoming programs. And let's conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.